American forms of government and economy compared to others. And the way we do that is we're going to explore the various types of and forms of government and economies. And in the end, you will be able to explain what are the advantages of how things are done in America. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So, first up is we're going to be taking a look at some forms of government that exist. Okay, so a lot of this is going to be a bit of a review based on your work in the TCI lessons. Okay? Now, you're going to be going through and you're going to be completing your notes, your chart there that you have. Okay, so let's take a look. First up, with the Republic. So, first of all, a republic is a nation where you see that the supreme power rests with the citizens. Right? So again, the focus of the republic is really about the citizens. This is one of the reasons that we looked at citizenship at the first part of our year, right? Because again, it would make some sense for me to tell you supreme power rests with the citizens if you're like, I don't even know what a citizen is. So that's where we started there. Now, how is the republic structured? Well, a republic is where the people or citizens, but mainly the people is the term that's usually used. They elect leaders, and then the leaders are the ones who make the laws or start programs that their constituents want. Essentially, they represent them, and the people are like, hey, we're going to vote you in. You're going to hold this position. You're going to hold this office. And we want you to be our representatives, to make laws, to make decisions, okay? Take care of the business of government, if you will. All right? Now, some examples of a republic. Outside the United States, of course, you have ancient Rome was actually a republic for nearly 500 years before it became an empire. Um, and in world history, you learn about the Roman Republic and the Roman government and the senators and those kinds of things. And unfortunately for Rome, it'll eventually evolve really into an empire. But for a long time, it really was a republic. Many nations today are actually republics. Um, they take various forms, how the republic plays itself out, but in general, most nations today are some form of republics. Okay? Obviously, the United States is. Most, particularly your Western countries are. I mean, many of your non-Western countries are as well, but in particular in the West, there's some form of a republic. All right, so the U.S. constitutional republic. As I told you before, the Constitution is the focal point of all of civics as far as a class goes. It is the what we are leading up to, right? We're describing, we're going to talk about some ancient influences and those kinds of things on it. And we're going to talk about what the Constitution actually says and then how it plays itself out. All right, that's a broad overview of what we do in civics. All right, so in 1787, the Constitution was established. This made the United States a constitutional republic. All right. In our particular case, it's what's called a presidential democracy. It's not a term you hear very often, but it's just important to know that we do have a very unique structure to our constitutional republic. But right now, you just need to really focus on the fact that the United States is a republic, again, which means that the supreme power rests with the citizens and is exercising their ability to elect representatives who then basically take care of the business of government, creating laws, things like that. Now, with this video, at any point, if you need to pause it to make sure you get all your notes covered, please do so. All right, so let's go on and we're going to move into another form of government called direct democracy. Okay? All right, so a direct democracy is one in which the citizens make public decisions directly. Okay? If there's a law to be made, citizens do it. Okay? Decisions to be made for government, citizens are the ones who do it. Okay, they don't have the elected representatives like you do in a republic who take care of these things. All right. Now, all citizens vote on every law. So, whereas in a republic, again, you have representatives who vote on laws, but in direct democracies, That's not the way that it works. Now, some examples. Uh, you had some of your ancient Greek city states were direct democracies. Um, really, about the only modern example as far as a nation goes would be Switzerland. They're the closest thing. Now, you do have some local like cities, or you would see more direct democracy in a smaller setting, whereas you might have the town halls and things like that. Um, but as far as on a larger scale, Switzerland's really about the only one that you see anymore. Um, Swiss citizens can vote to approve laws that have been passed by the legislature, so they do have some power. In Florida, you have a little bit of that. In Florida, citizens can get things on the ballot to change the Florida Constitution. So you see bits and pieces of it, but it's not whole scale direct democracy. So, how does this compare to the US constitutional republic? Well, the, th- the thing of it is that trying to get everyone together to vote on everything really, really difficult and very time consuming. I mean, if you could imagine trying to get, 350 million or so people together to vote on something, that's hard to do. And so by electing leaders to take care of a lot of these things, right, it's a far more efficient process. This is definitely something the founders, when they were laying out the Constitution in 1787, were definitely taking a look at and saying, you know what, that's just as much as we want the people, the citizens, to have the power and the authority rests with them. We've got to find a way to be more efficient. The country, even at the time, they recognized was too large for a more direct democracy style. All right, so now let's take a look at monarchy. This is one of those forms of government that most people are at least somewhat familiar with. Okay. All right, so by definition, a monarchy has a single ruler who exercises supreme power, and they have their authority usually based on one of two things, either heredity, all right, or divine right. Okay. So if you get it from your heredity, it means that your dad was king, so now you're king, right? That kind of thing. Okay. Structurally, it's one person as a ruler. Again, they often inherit the power. Um, at one point in time, you monarchies for them almost wholesale what we call an absolute monarchy. There are still some absolute monarchies today, but that's not as true. They're usually limited in some way. What we call a constitutional monarchy. In particular, you see here, this was Queen Elizabeth passed away not too long ago. She was the monarch of the United Kingdom, and she was a constitutional monarch. Right. However, there are some absolute monarchs. One of the most well-known examples in modern times is that of Saudi Arabia. The Saudi king has absolute power. Okay, this is an absolute monarchy. There is no constitution or anything like that that limits their power, and what they say goes. Again, the United Kingdom, the monarchs there are limited by law. This actually started back with a document called the Magna Carta, which we'll take a look at here in the next few weeks. But these monarchs, even if they're limited by law, still have some official roles. Diplomatic duties, in particular, are quite common. They are maybe listed as heads of state, even if they don't have any true direct power in the government. So, as far as comparing that to the U.S. constitutional republic, the people have no choice about who is the monarch. Right? It's handed down from, one generation to the next, or stays within a family, and there's just no voice there for the people. Right? People don't you can't vote them out. Like we're in the middle of a presidential election, right? And so people have a choice. They can choose to keep the current um, what we say administration, if you will, even though Joe Biden is no longer running, his vice president is. So people can look at that and say, well, if they want to keep the current administration in for another 4 years, they can do that, or they can make a choice for someone else, right? And so again, this is an option that you have in the constitutional republic in the United States. All right, next up is the oligarchy. All right, so the oligarchy is where the government is in which the ruling powers are in the hands of very few people. Okay, um, and many times within an oligarchy, you'll have sort of one of the oligarchs, rather, who is tends to be more powerful, but collectively, that's where all the power lies. So you have a small number of people, usually from some kind of wealthy or powerful families, um, that control the government. It's a in that sense, it's very similar to monarchies in that it's not directly handed down, but it does tend to stay within a family. All right, so some modern examples, one of which is China. Actually, most people don't really realize this. They are really more of an oligarchy. The power has resided with a few families who have been in power really since the Civil War ended in 1949. Also, you see pictured here, this under the structures. That picture is actually Vladimir Putin, and he's the quote president of Russia. But in reality, Russia really is more of an oligarchy. They have some oligarchs who have a tremendous amount of power, and he's sort of like the head of the oligarchs, if you will. Okay. Now, how does this compare to a U.S. constitutional republic? Well, oligarchs tend to be about themselves. They're not there to represent the people's interests. They're all about themselves. How can they have more money? How can they have more power? How can they remain in power? They can be very abusive of their power. In the United States, if someone starts to act like these oligarchs, they can be removed from office, whether voted out or there's impeachment processes or recall processes, things like that. But again, an oligarchy, the power really resides in a small group of people. U.S. constitutional republic, at the end of the day, the power is with the people. Hence, we the people in the U.S. Constitution. All right, next up is a theocracy. So, a theocracy is when your government leaders or the head of the government are your religious leaders. Okay. Um, and there is a, what people would say is church. Church means religious leader or religion. Doesn't mean like a Christian church per se. Okay. So what you would have is a small group of religious leaders, right? Whoever they are also the heads of the government. And you also see a state religion as well. It's a, there is no real distinction between the what's called church and state. There's they're kind of one and the same, if you will. Okay. There's been some definitely some examples of this, like in U.S. history, like the Puritans, for example, they were a theocracy. But in modern day, you're look really one of the most well-known examples would be uh, Iran. All right, they list themselves as Democratic Republic, I believe, of Iran. Uh, the reality is they're a theocracy. The head of state is the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, I believe is his name. In either way, the Ayatollahs are the heads of the um, Islamic. They're Islamic religious leaders. This is the best way to put it. They are also the heads of the Iranian government. Okay. They also make sure there's a group that makes sure that any laws passed in Iran line up with Islamic law. Okay, so that again, one and the same, church and state. So, how does this compare to the U.S. constitutional republic? Well, theocracies, by their nature, limit religious freedom. Very difficult, if not impossible, to be, say, a practicing Christian in Iran. Why? Because it's a theocracy. You have Islamic law, and Islamic law is going to obviously interfere with being a practicing Christian. And so this is where you have virtually no religious freedom in theocracies. As comparison, in the US Constitution, there is a separation between the government and religion, or the church, as many people call it. And you also have certain guaranteed freedoms for um, your own personal religion. You can find this, it's called freedom of religion, and you can find this in what's called the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, also known as what's the Bill of Rights, actually, is what a lot of people, again, we'll get to that more later. All right. So our next group here is the autocracy. Okay. So what is an autocracy, you may ask? Well, it's a system of government where the leader rules with unlimited power. Okay. Um, and some of these will seem very similar, but there are some key differences. So we're going to walk through autocracy, and some of you may be thinking, "But that sounds so familiar." In a lot of ways, it is, but they have their own uniqueness to them. So organizationally, most people call an autocracy a dictatorship. All right. Um, and in these dictatorships or autocracies, what you have is a leader who's controlling the police and the military, and they use them specifically to oppress the people. Um, they may even look to not just oppress, but persecute certain groups of people as well. And it's all about control at the end of the day. Also, these leaders usually come up through some type of either through the military or some kind of rebellion. So, some examples of autocracies. There's quite a few actually pictured here. I mean, you see in the text in your notes is Italy and Benito Mussolini. This was Mussolini was closely associated actually with World War II. Italy, he was called a fascist dictator before World War II. But you also see pictured here the first picture under definition. That's actually Joseph Stalin. He was the head of the Soviet Union during, like, say, World War II time period. And then you have arguably the most infamous, particularly of the 20th century dictator, was Adolf Hitler. And then you have Mussolini here. And so these are just some examples. You've also had others down in the Dominican Republic. Again, dictators tend to rule for long periods of time because they are oppressing their people. They have control of the military and the police. So, how does this compare to the U.S. constitutional republic? Well, autocracies tend to use violence and intimidation to stay in power. There's also a consolidation of all of the different, what we would call branches of government. So, and they all fall under the dictator. So, the dictator would be over the what we call the legislature, right? And they would be over the executive, and they're over the judges and judiciary. Okay, there's no autocracies lack what's called the separation of powers. It all funnels into a single person. Even if you have these other groups or institutions, so you may have judges, for example, but ultimately they're not going to do anything that goes against the dictator, right? Because again, they could be killed or whatever it may be. All right. So next up for you, ladies and gentlemen, is you are going to be answering the question on if you take a look at these different forms, which one do you think would be the best to have, right? And you can choose any of them, right? You can choose a republic, you can choose autocracy, you can choose theocracy, or any of them. It doesn't matter which one you choose. The one thing, though, that you will have to do is explain why you think that would be the best form of government. So, again, choose one of the forms, okay? And you're going to be doing this on Canvas. There's a Canvas link for you to this little quiz where you're going to fill out. Again, you're going to choose one of the forms here that we've done on the notes. You say, all right, I think that monarchy would be the best form of government to have because, and then give me reasons. I'm looking for why you think that. Okay. Again, no wrong answer per se, but if you don't give me a reason, right, then you're not really answering the question. Okay. So definitely, if you don't have all the notes, make sure you go back through this video and get that taken care of. Make sure you have all your notes together. And then once you have that, you're going to see that very next piece to this in the module. Okay, you're going to see the forms question, if you will, and the which form do you believe would be the best form of government to have and why. You're going to answer that question.